Hello everybody. Today's lesson is all going to be on secondary storage. Now, what this series is all to do with is giving you as little as possible to remember and still being able to access the top marks in any GCSE Computer Science spec. Today, particularly being the AQA spec. My name's Josh. My credentials is that I was an examiner for 5 years. I've taught thousands of students for computer science. I was a teacher. I run a tutoring business. And what I was thinking was that I could use my knowledge to help people by giving you the minimal that you have to remember to be able to access those top marks. So the way that we do this is I go through every spec point. This is all of the information that can come up on the exams, and then I think of any potential question that I've come over using my experience, so that then it's not loads of extra information, it's just the things that you need. So these are the spec points that we're going to be covering today. We are going to be covering the solid state, optical and magnetic, so secondary storage. We are also going to be looking at general advantages and disadvantages of them. We're also going to have a quick look at cloud storage and then the advantages and disadvantages of this. So quick point, we're going to have a quick look at secondary storage. So let's give an example of secondary storage and be able to describe it. We've got it's non-volatile permanent storage. Remember, non-volatile just meaning when it doesn't have power and you turn it back on, it remembers everything. An example of this would then be one of the three categories, which is solid state, magnetic, and optical. Now, how I've decided to set this out is this page is all going to be to do with optical. Now, you do need to know how optical works on the AQA spec, but you also got to be able to give examples. And going off what I was saying yes, there are lots of advantages and lots of disadvantages to do with optical, but what we're trying to do is give you as little as possible to remember, because then you haven't got to remember as much and you still get the top grades. So with optical, examples of this is going to be CDs and DVDs. How optical works, this could be a 4 to 5 mark question. Disc spins and a laser is shone at the disc. I'll get you 2 marks. There are these things called pits and lands going out in a spiral from the middle of the disc. The laser reflection is measured when it passes over the pits and lands, and this is what determines whether it's a 1 or a 0. So if you get all of that, that would get you the top 5 marks on that question. Advantages, as I said, there's plenty, but we're trying to minimize the amount that you have to revise. Is CDs that are very portable. Is essentially CDs and DVDs, they're both very, very portable. Disadvantages, though, is that they can be scratched and damaged very easily. This one is all to do with magnetic. Now, the only real example that we can use is HDD, hard disk drives. Now, HDD essentially works in a very similar way to optical. Again, we're trying to minimize the amount that you have to remember so that you can still get the top marks. So, has a disk which spins, similar to the optical. Disk is split up into tracks and sectors. A read-write head goes over different areas and reads whether the data is a 1 or a 0. Okay, so it's looking over those tracks and sectors and trying to work out whether it's a 1 or a 0. Again, there's plenty of advantages, but we're just going to get 1 or 2 of them because we want to give ourselves as little as possible to remember. Advantage: large storage capacity for cost of the item. So it's very cheap and you get a lot of storage. The disadvantage is it's not portable and it's easy to damage as it has moving parts. Now, pretty much any situation, if it asks it, so what it could do is give you a scenario and say, what would you recommend to use out of solid state, optical and magnetic? The only situation that I can think of that you would maybe use a solid state that I've seen a question on is where it had a company where its budget wasn't limitless, so it didn't have an infinite budget, and it needed to do some backups on a secondary storage device. The reason you would use a magnetic storage device, a hard disk drive, or a very, very large, you could probably put this on a server, which is magnetic, or magnetic hard drives attached to it, is it's got a huge capacity and the read and write speeds aren't essential. So with solid state, it's got the quickest read and write speeds. And pretty much any scenario, they are going to be best. But in this situation, if you wanted to save a bit of money and you just needed huge storage, this might be the situation that you'd use it. So just trying to relate it to that question. Final one is we've got solid state. So the examples is SD cards, USB sticks, solid state drives, micro SDs as well in there. Describe how solid state works. This is what all you have to know for this one. It works by having an electrical charge that runs through the devices, which are either trapped or not trapped. The electrical charges, that is. This determines whether it is a 1 or a 0, which is red. So you've always got to relate it back to with how computers are underpinned by 1s and 0s. That's how data is stored. So as long as you've got the information about whether it's trapped or not trapped, and that determines whether it's a 1 or a 0, then you're fine. Advantages, pretty much solid state devices are the best, and that is why that I would say that they are being used more than any of the others now. CDs and DVDs aren't even really used anymore. But they've got the quickest read and write speeds out of everything. The disadvantages of it, though, is the only real one is it's more expensive in comparison to the amount of storage that you get in other ones, which is why we use that example with magnetic, where it might be a better situation to use magnetic. Now, this is a bit of a longer style question, okay? A longer style question, which they do sometimes come up on the AQA spec, which I thought would be worth us having a quick look at. So it's given us a scenario for Jim the photographer, and he needs to buy a new piece of secondary storage. And what it's saying to us here is that it wants us to discuss all of the secondary storage categories and explain which you would recommend. So in this scenario, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk through absolutely everything on this, like go through the whole thing, because that would be incredibly boring. But what I want you to do is I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things which I see a lot of students make mistakes on. So let me just move this just in case it's not in view perfectly for you. Okay. So with this, what I would be saying, people, is that you need to be talking about how you need to talk about every single categories, so you need to talk about optical, magnetic, and solid state. Now, if I take a point out of there, so I'm constantly relating it to the question. What I see people make is a generic point. So they'll say something along the lines of like CDs are portable, and that'd be good. Now, relating that to the question would be like this. CDs are very, very portable. This would be useful for Jim as a photographer is constantly moving around and taking pictures. So can you see how just that little extra sentence has, I've got those application marks. And if you can do that for every single point, that is what's going to get you into the top mark band, which could get you the 8s out of 8s. You've also got things in there where you need to make sure that you're making points about all of them. And also, if you can, make an advantage point and a disadvantage point. The discussional questions, they're trying to see, do you understand the whole argument? So that's why you've got to say an advantage for one of them, and then a disadvantage for the next one. Generally, as a rule of thumb, if I was to give someone 8 out of 8, what I'd be looking for is that they've talked about each category, they've made one advantage point and one disadvantage point on each of these, and the written English is very good. So if you have a look at this one, and you'll see that I've made the points on each of these, and it's a relatively straightforward way to getting really high marks on this. Final little points that we're going to have a little look at is this one, the cloud storage, and the advantages and disadvantages of this one. So the advantages. So first of all, let's define what cloud storage is. So cloud storage is where storage is not held on your actual device, but a remote server in another location. It requires an internet connection. So this would be, just to give you some examples, would be like Office 365, Google Drive, any kind of device where or any kind of website where you're storing your files on there. Now, explain 2 advantages and disadvantages of cloud storage. So this could be up to 4 marks. Plus points are the advantages. Can access the files from any device as long as it has internet. Easier to collaborate with other people, so you can collaborate with people all over the world, essentially, as long as everybody's got an internet connection. Has to have. So the negatives though is you have to have an internet connection to access it. Some people may not have access to that, or their internet may be going in and out. And you're also trusting a third party with the security of your files. So that is all for this topic, people. So again, make your flashcards, do those maintenance activities, go over the materials as much as you can, because this is what's going to help you get it to go into your long-term memory.